So this is in the wake of the storm. It is kind of a descendant of the first thing we really got involved in when I was in prevention first. Um, the Illinois, I forget what the SSA was called at the time, Nancy. Um, the Illinois SSA had a joint conference with the National Association of Children of Alcoholics. It was kind of a historic event, had some magnificent performers there, and presenters, and they were what they told us ended up in an article which ended up turning into Breaking the Chain manual, making prevention programs effective and safe for children of troubled families. Excuse me. Which, by the way, I do have a PDF of that. So Nancy, if you'd like, if you have a place on your website, we could stick that PDF on it. This was way before they had PDFs or Windows or anything like that. So that was something where we tried to take recovery principles and pull them into the prevention system, which had developed separately, sort of out of a school-based model, whereas the treatment system had come out of a grassroots model, and the mental health system had come out of the medical system. So we were trying to pull some of that stuff together. So there's the storm that we're talking about. Why does it say troubled families on that? Why am I not saying addicted families or dysfunctional families? We're using that word because we want to be more inclusive. We want to make room for intersectionality, like all the different things that could be going on in families, along with the behavioral health conditions. We also wanted to use and sort of put out there into the universe for people to use a less pejorative term, a less stigmatizing term. And that was something that was suggested way back at that Illinois NACOA conference. The idea of using the word troubled families, especially when you're working with kids. So who are we talking about when we're talking about this this population? People whose families of origin have suffered from mental health conditions, substance use disorders, neurological challenges, intellectual disabilities, gambling disorders, eating disorders, really the whole gamut. And often the fallout from these conditions can be exacerbated by things like parental divorce, the incarceration of the parent or a sibling, the serious illness or death of a patient, a parent or a sibling. And of course, families with these conditions may also be the target of stigma, be experiencing social ostracism or othering, poverty, foreclosure, eviction, homelessness, lots of kinds of adversity follow. And we're also talking about people whose families have suffered many cases for generations from traumatic experiences related to the substance use disorders, the mental health conditions, other challenges. The trauma is shot through, and that was a central theme of the Breaking the Chain manual, was that the key thing is trauma. And of course, when we talk about people who were raised in troubled families, we're also talking about many of the people working and volunteering in this field, in the various fields who are attending here. And we'll find out a little bit more about who's here and what fields you represent, because that's something that's really important to me before we start breaking up for our first group. And you know, um, for those of you who are familiar with the ACE study, um, the adverse childhood experiences study, some of the circumstances we talked about in the last slide will sound pretty familiar because they have found that a lot of these experiences also cause more or lead to or are correlated with more challenges later in life. Just in case anybody hasn't heard of the ACE study, uh, Vincent Felitti from Kaiser Permanente was doing a study for this major um, HMO about this was on obesity and weight loss and weight regain experiences. And so he had a bunch of people who had lost a lot of weight and then gained it back, and there were some interviewers interviewing them and getting information about that. And what led to the ACE study was a conversation that he had with a woman, and when he got the questions mixed up. He was supposed to ask, how many pounds did you weigh at this time, and how many pounds did you weigh at that time, and then how many, when was your first this, did this happen? And instead of keeping those two ideas separate, he said at one point, how many pounds did you weigh when you had your first sexual intercourse? And she answered 48 or something like that. I don't remember the exact number. And of course, he found out that she had experienced sexual molestation when she was a child. And so he started having the interviewers ask questions about their sexual histories as children. And he was finding that a lot of cases where women were having a really hard time with weight, there also were cases of incest, childhood sexual abuse. And then at a banquet for some organization, he ended up sitting next to Robert Anda from the Centers for Disease Control, and telling him about this. And that conversation turned into the ACE study, where it was a very large study where they took members of their HMO. So this was not clinical populations. This was a huge hunk, of quote normal end quote people, and they found that the kinds of stressors that people had experienced when they were children really, really surprised them, distressed them. A lot of physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse. You notice substance abuse in the household, 27%, mental illness in the household, 19%. That was back when they used to use the word substance abuse. Actually, some people still do. Divorce, separation, very high. Domestic violence. And here's just one example. Can't go into the whole study, but childhood experiences. They counted the number. They called these experiences of adversity, they called it an ACE, an adverse childhood experience. And they counted the numbers of types of adverse childhood experience, whether you experienced that 20 times or one time or every day. It was one on your ACE score for each type of childhood experience. And they found that the more types of childhood experience, the more problems people developed later in life. And of course, these were adults whom they were interviewing, so they knew what had happened to people later on. And this was not only things like addiction, like depressive disorders, like, mental health conditions. This was also cancer, incarceration. They would also measure things like the use of venous drugs. So there were a lot of things. Divorce later in life. So, and there have been many studies from the ACE study. So we know that the kinds of adversity we're talking about were very common. I have a question for you first, though. How has your millennium been going so far? Are we having fun? How has it? What's been happening to us as a society? And it's kind of hard. I'm gonna stop sharing for a second just to because I want to hear people, and then I'll come back. What have been some of the things that we've been dealing with as a society? And you can just unmute yourself and shout it out.
A lot of gun violence.
A lot of gun violence, yes. What else have we had?
Isolating ourselves,
Yeah. We've had a whole pandemic, which for introverts like me is, that's the one consolation to give me an excuse to isolate. What other things have we been experiencing in this millennium since the turn of the century?
I was one of those kids that was raised by the grandparents, so you've seen a lot of kids raised by older generations.
Yes. That's got to be up. Nancy, is that up, the number of people being raised by older generations?
Yes, it is. In the study that came out by Generations United last year, it's gone up, a good 500,000 in just 1 year. Wow. Across the United States, and in Illinois, it's gone up several, like, I don't know, 70 or 80,000.
Wow.
Not just grandparents, but other kinship care.
Wow. Anybody else? What kind
I'm wondering if more pregnancies out of wedlock, like if that's increased over the years.
I do not know. Do you know, Nancy? You're muted.
Yeah, I realize that. I don't know, but quite honestly, just being out and around and knowing people in our community, I would say it's gone up. The acceptance of it has gone up.
Is anybody around here a Brene Brown fan? Yeah. I am a huge fan. If you use Audible, you ought to check out a long webinar that she did that's available on Audible called The Power of Vulnerability. She recorded it in 2013. That was after her big TED Talk that on the same subject. In one section, the reason to listen to it, part of it is that she has a lot of wonderful information on shame and vulnerability and the effects of things and the opposite of that. What is the opposite of shame? But also because she's so funny. She is absolutely wonderful. She's in her element. If you've read her books, she's not in her element when she's writing the books, but when she's speaking, she is. But in one section, she asks us to consider two families, to imagine two families. Maybe they're related by ancestry. Maybe there are two brothers or two sisters, and each one has a family. And that family, at one point, one of these families has a horrific traumatic experience. One of their kids dies, and that might be an auto accident or something like that. The other family, there's a war, and 2 kids are sent to that war, and only one of them comes back. And then the family goes through a financial catastrophe, and one of the family loses everything or loses quite a lot. And she said that metaphor was how things had been for us as a country, with 9/11, 2 long wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, and then the housing crash of 2008. And by the time she recorded this in 2013, that was all that had happened. And of course, now we've had a pandemic, and that pandemic not only isolated people and increased the level of loneliness, which they never used to measure loneliness, right? Or not that they would tell us about, but it increased family violence, in domestic violence situations. It was through the roof. It made it really hard for people to get help for behavioral health conditions, and it still is hard for a lot of people. We've had the opioid crisis, which they noticed early, and they treated as a medical thing because it was mostly happening to white people. And now it has become more egalitarian, and more people of color also have it, but it's still being treated as a medical condition. And there's a lot of violence. There is a lot of gun violence. There are a lot of mass shootings, one after another. A lot of videotapes of young Black men being killed by police. And we have the worst social and political polarization and mistrust since the Civil War. So we're really experiencing a lot. I'm going to share the screen again. So that's what we're going through right now. And I would also wager that there's a sort of a pervasive, like there's a sense of fragility and unease about us, especially with all the news about climate stuff and all the weather stuff that's happening, and the news about what's happening to the rainforests in places that have sort of been the lungs of the universe for a while, or at least the lungs of the earth for a while. There's a whole deluge of unsettling information, certainly on social media, but also on television too, and in print media. We have a field that is overworked. We are overworked. We are overwhelmed. We are overfunded. We are underpaid, and we are desperately needed. And yes, we're not getting enough sleep or enough exercise. Some of us are not even getting enough sex. It's a good thing we can't see you in case you raise your hand to that one. Because who has time? There's too much else to do. So with all that stuff, what can we accomplish by learning more about this population, people who were raised in troubled families? I am going to stop sharing for a second so we can talk. Stop sharing. Okay, cool. So what are some thoughts about, like, that could be also, if you wanted to say what field you're in, or what kind of facility you work in, what kind of organization, this might be a good time to do that. And why you're here, obviously CEUs, but what can we accomplish by looking at this population? Didn't we do all this in the 1990s? Isn't this all done? You know, we're not worried about it anymore. Anybody, so just unmute yourselves and just call it out. And you can call out your name if you want to too.
I could go first. So my name is Angelica. I work with Lutheran Social Services. I'm a therapist. I think looking at my generation and mixed in with the younger generation, because I'm a millennial, I am seeing a lot of mental health being okay, a lot of understanding that, because during my time it was still not okay. Also seen as a minority, Hispanic minority, teaching the younger generation, you know, it's okay to ask for help and stuff like that. So I've been seeing that a big push of younger generation speaking out and, you know, letting older generation, you know, that's not okay. We need more help and, you know, that kind of stuff. So I've seen the positive of that, you know, and also being a minority in the mental health setting, because there's a little bit of us, we're getting there, but it's not to the full potential it could be.
That makes sense. So we need to get a little more information in that to help figure out what people are going through. Thank you. Who's next?
I'll go. My name is Pam Harkness. I also work for Lutheran Social Services. I work with children in the foster system. And for me, what I'm seeing is maybe more of, like, to piggyback what Angelica said, as far as people are more accepting of the mental illness, you know, and being able to admit that, you know, maybe they need some help, but also trying to break that generational trauma. So having the courage to not do what your parents did or your grandparents did, and trying to, you know, to say, you know, that's not what I want for my family. So starting to see some of that, which is great.
Thank you, Pamela. Who's next? Why study this population? If we study this population, will we learn a little bit more about our colleagues? Will we learn a little more about our field and how it's functioning? Any other things? One of the reasons we're covering this subject now, or not covering it, we are touching on this subject. It's all you can really do in a webinar, is that yes, we became immersed in this subject back in the 90s, but we've learned a lot more as a field. And, you know, I've learned a lot more. Nancy has learned a lot more. And we want to share the updates on what we have learned. We also kind of want to get a more holistic picture of the long-term effects of childhood adversity. We were focused inward on the field and on our immediate service population, but what we realize now is that there are a whole lot of circumstances that are bound together, and intergenerational trauma is a big factor in an awful lot of things. And we want to identify opportunities for intervention, identify opportunities for progress that we might make. And we want to make our services and our serving settings, our approaches more safe, more effective for the people we serve. So we've got objectives to this webinar. You can read them. I don't have to read them to you. Talking about 3 core experiences. We've talked about resilience factors, clinical challenges, things that can get adult children, and that term adult children was coined, way back when, probably in the 80s, I don't know. But to speak of people who were raised adult children of blank, addicted families or troubled families, that can get people stuck as adults, and that might make it harder to serve people, to help people. And we're going to talk about things that might make treatment and recovery safer and more effective. So let's look at some challenges. This family has a lot of challenges. There are going to be, this first exercise is going to have 5 groups. And you're going to pick which one you join. So as we go through them one by one, you could write down experiences, write down the number associated with it, because Nancy's going to give us a choice of breakout rooms. So here's group 1, core experiences. What are some core experiences that children endure in troubled families? And all of these things that I'm having on these slides are called core, basically central, fundamental, important. When we started working on the issues of children from troubled families, a lot of it would get caught up in like the roles that kids take on in addicted families. That is, this one's the hero, that one's the and those are very important. That's maybe core adaptations, but I like to start at the core, at the center, and core experiences. Basically, here is what are some conditions in the home. What are some things that happen to kids, like being shamed and blamed, being neglected, being lied to, name it. What are some core experiences of children in troubled families? Group 2, this is a central one as well. Some core issues you've seen children or in adults who were raised in troubled families, because they're no longer living in the family. They're no longer, with the parents, or they may be living, in the family home still. But some of the ways in which the child is affected by those things that happen, and by all the undercurrents, because it isn't just about what happens, right? It's also about the undercurrents, about the trying to figure it out, trying to navigate the undercurrents. And so some core issues might be like being ashamed of who we are, or having issues with trust, or being afraid all the time, or having a hair trigger temper or something like that. What are some of the core issues? And group 3 is going to be talking about core defenses, attitudes or actions that kids sometimes take on because on some level, maybe it's conscious level, maybe it's not, they think it might protect them. One pretty common one is blaming themselves for things that aren't their fault. When you're a powerless child, or relatively powerless child, and things are happening, crazy things or painful things are happening around us, we may get some comfort out of the idea that we can blame ourselves, because if we're to blame, if we're at fault, maybe we might be able to control it someday. We can figure out that magic switch on ourselves that would make us make horrible things happen. So that's one thing. Or being really tough. That's another common defense, or being perfect. Kathleen Brooks, who is a researcher, counselor, thinker, model maker in the children of addicted families realm, once told us about a study that they did with kids who were living in very troubled families. And they gave the kids tests to measure their psychological health while their parents were in getting some treatment services. They would give the kids, they would have programs for the kids, and one of the things that they did was they gave the kids these tests. And what they found with these tests was that the kids who scored most troubled on the psychological tests had more psychological stuff going on with them, going wrong with them. Those were generally the good kids. The ones who made no trouble, the ones who were compliant, the ones who seemed to have nothing going on. The kids who acted out more scored as less troubled on the psychiatric measures. And I don't know if you can guess who were the healthiest, the psychologically healthiest. Those were the runaways. So, and when you talk about these core defenses in children, you can also talk about them in adults, right? In people who come in to see you as adults, because they, if a defense is working in some way, even in some quote dysfunctional end quote way, well, it's functional to a certain extent, right? It's accomplishing something that may not be the most pro-social thing or the thing that's going to lead us to a fulfilling life, but it is something that it feels protective in some ways. Group 4, what are some core resilience factors you've seen in children or in adults who were raised in troubled families? And I mean, 2 types of things basically in terms of resilience factors. I'm looking really loosely at it or inclusively. It could be a skill or a trait or a talent that the child has, like a sense of humor, a love of learning, or just the ability to really love people, something like that, or connect with people. It could also be a resource around the child. It could be a human resource, like an adult who is kind and caring and consistent. Doesn't even have to be in the family. Or it could be, a cultural tradition that was empowering or nurturing for the child, or maybe the child has a really good group of friends or something like that who can be trusted. So that's group 4. Group 5 is going to talk about some of the clinical challenges that tend to show up in children or adults who were raised in, and what because you'll have these DSM diagnoses or call them something else if you have a name for the condition. But I'd also like you to look at what are some of the clusters of clinical challenges that you might be seeing, because I'm particularly interested in that. By clusters, I might mean, say, a lot of people who seem to share the same 2 or 3 diagnoses. Obviously, if you don't work with diagnoses or anything like that, you might want to be in a different group, or if you have thoughts on that you want to contribute, why not be in that group? So those are the 5 groups. And like everybody, each group, once you get together, I want somebody to volunteer to be the reporter, and that's the person who takes notes. And then when we get together, that person reports what you heard, what the group was saying, what the group was saying, the group's ideas and insights and thoughts. like you to get a facilitator. The facilitator basically will make sure everybody gets a chance to talk, sort of redirects the group if it gets way off topic, make sure nobody does a monologue and just keeps going and doesn't give other people a chance to talk. And some of the guidelines, being respectful of everybody's ideas and experiences, not interrupting, not talking over people, and a really important one, if a group member tells about a personal experience, don't repeat that experience to anybody outside the group after you're done. Not even if you're the reporter and you're back in the whole group session and oh gee, I'm gonna tell you about this juicy story that came up. So what other guidelines would anybody like to suggest? Anybody think of any for your small groups? And if you think of them while you're in your group, it's a good idea to mention them at the beginning. Okay, so also in the breakout room, if you can turn your camera on, that would be very good. People will be taking some risks. I hope people will be taking some risks, and getting, being vulnerable and expressing their ideas. So if your camera is on, people will know you're not laughing at them or brushing your teeth or anything like that. It fosters connection. It fosters honesty, and it rewards honesty as well. So I would really appreciate that. I don't know if you can see that. She's saying, hi, everyone. Sorry about the mess. And yes. So.
You ready?
Pardon? So
Okay,
here are the numbers. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and Nancy is going to flash the group numbers. So 1 is core experiences, 2 is core issues, 3 is core defenses, 4 core resilience vectors, and 5 clinical challenges. I'm going to stop sharing.
Okay, let's hope this works. This is a new experience.
Yes.
Okay, we're going to let you choose your room.
And I am so proud of Nancy for having figured out how to do this.
Well, let's see. Let's go.
Yeah. We've got some comments in the chat.
Here we go. So it's all yours, Pam.
All right. Welcome back. Let's talk about the breakout rooms. Now, I can fill in for the rooms that didn't get filled, but I'm going to ask you first if anybody can think of anything to throw in. So for group 1, what are some core experiences that children live through in troubled families? Anybody want to throw something out? Just unmute yourselves, please, and just shout out. Okay. Now you will notice in these sessions where the group is all together and there's no slides, you'll notice me looking up and looking down. My camera is at the top of my display of my what's that called? Monitor. And my computer is down at hand level. So if it looks like I have shifty eyes, it's not that. It's just that in order to look at you, I have to look down. In order to talk to you and communicate to you, I have to look up. So overwhelming fear, helplessness, neglect, emotional disconnection, abandonment. There could be abuse. It could be physical, sexual, emotional, spiritual violence, othering. There could be ostracism, within the family or outside, bullying. There can be a dismissal of the child's strengths, the child's skills, value, and potential. And there can be scapegoating, maybe profound misjudgment of the child's motives and actions. There can be shaming and blaming, dehumanization even. often over nothing, or over factors the child can't control, or over just who the child is. There can be betrayal of important promises. They might have been completely forgotten, right? Because, you know, they were made in a moment of maybe the influence of a substance or something like that. Betrayal of the truth, betrayal of the child's sense of what's right. And that gets into the whole area of moral distress, and at the far end of that, moral injury. There can be significant losses that are often ignored, and grief that needs to be grieved, but maybe never quite is. And remember, all of these experiences may be the result of the actions and the choices of the people whom children love and need and value most in the world. And people who love them, need them, and value them most in the world. But these illnesses mess things up in some pretty significant ways. Anything to add to group one? All right, let's go on to group two. What are some core issues? Now, there are lots of people in group two, and so I'm hoping that your reporter has some juicy stuff for us. What are some core issues that you've seen in children or in adults who were raised in troubled families? Who's the reporter for group two?
I wrote, thanks, John.
Excellent.
So, we have acting out, trouble in school, anxiety, depression, low self-esteem, trauma symptoms that mimic ADHD, problems with trust, self-harm, angry, poor decision-making skills, intellectual delays, substance issues depending on age, might be incarcerated depending on age, separation anxiety, and sometimes dealing with DCFS.
Wonderful, wonderful. I mean, not wonderful that those things are happening, but wonderful that you got so much stuff. Absolutely. You know, and as Bessel van der Kolk noticed and noted, and he's somebody you really should read on the subject of trauma. His The Body Keeps the Score is just magnificent. But he noted that John Bowlby, who developed attachment theory, these ideas started when he was working with children in London who had been sent away from their families, or children who had been abused in their families, and all the things that he was seeing in children really inspired his lifelong work, which ended up in the development of attachment theory. So there is a lot of disruption of attachment because of connections, types of connections that aren't being made. You also mentioned things that mimic ADHD. Van der Kolk noticed that in the types of diagnoses that that children received when they, back before people were really thinking about trauma much with children, that there was what he called a blizzard of diagnoses that they would receive, and that almost all of them had a diagnosis of ADHD. There are things about that connection that we do not know. Okay, so let's go on to group 3, which is what are some core defenses that you've seen in children or in adults who were raised in troubled families?
Hi, okay, there's about, I think, 5 of us. So, to get in clinical terms, we can talk about the common defense mechanisms like repression, projection, denial. Those are some of the things that we all know about. But we kind of went into more like, the more realistic of using humor, maybe keeping secrets or telling lies just so they don't have to deal with their problems. Anger and aggression, so showing some of that aggression or anger to deal with, deal with, that's how they deal with it. And please, any of you chime in if I'm missing anything. Manipulation to protect themselves. So using manipulation to kind of protect their feelings, and so that they don't have to, like, work through them. They'll kind of work around them. Blaming others. We talked about this with substance abuse. Many people will blame others for why they're using, or they won't take accountability. But we also talked about how they blame themselves too. And we kind of looked at that as situational. So maybe victims of abuse would blame themselves, but victims of like substance abuse or like physical or emotional abuse might blame themselves, but substance abuse might blame others. So it really kind of depended on the situation. Needing relationships for validation, maybe they didn't get it in their family. And so looking for love or, really kind of that codependency of, needing a relationship or that validation from others. And it doesn't always have to be a healthy validation. That's kind of where the problem lies in. Also, one of the defense mechanisms is using alcohol, drugs, you can name anything really, sex, gambling, shopping, doing that in excess to mask your situation. So you don't want to deal with your situation. So you tend to have addictive behaviors. And then we kind of talked about social media having an impact on interpersonal skills, which is why maybe some of these defense mechanisms come up, because they really don't know how to handle it. They don't know how to process their feelings. They cannot express themselves. And when I say they, we talked a lot about children, but I mean, it can happen in adults too. And then a couple of people brought up some great points of the schools not holding students accountable for their actions. Just the rules have kind of changed and it's gotten a little laxed. And so the accountability even in the schools has lessened. Which may make it so that they have more access to doing things that might be harmful to themselves rather than helping themselves. So let me know if I missed anything.
With them not holding people accountable enough in schools, I'm wondering how much of that might be a post-pandemic phenomenon.
Oh,
That they don't know how to deal with that now. What do we do? How much do we understand, and how do we understand what's happening and still help mold people's behavior? Excellent, thank you. I'll mention some of the resilience factors for group 4. Did anybody go into group 4? No. Nope, nobody was interested in the resilience factors.
I tried to, but I was alone.
Okay, why don't you do us some thoughts about resilience factors? What would you have said?
Go ahead.
Okay, so the different kinds of help that kids can have available to them, having one kind adult, having somebody who can validate their pain, comfort them, help them find a sense of resolution, that can be absolutely pivotal. That was something that Kathleen Brooks pointed out when we were doing Breaking the Chain. There are, I
think one real big resiliency factor is going into this field. So I find like a lot of people that have been victims of abuse, or whether it be domestic or substance, tend to go into the field to help others. Mm-hmm. And so I look at that as kind of like a resiliency, trait, not giving up.
Yeah, it can be like the idea of the wounded healer, the fact that we get well by helping others. There's a danger in the wounded healer because we may use that as a substitute for getting help for ourselves. And the field has suffered from that somewhat. So we've got this dichotomy. On one hand, yes, it gives purpose and meaning to our lives. It brings together the past and the present and the future. It gives meaning to the things that we've learned the hard way. And on the other hand, if we rely on that and don't take care of ourselves, then that can be harmful to us and ultimately harmful to the people we're trying to help too. I remember once when I was writing a manual on self-care, and I had strep throat, which I had not dealt with, and I was about to stay up most of the night and drive down to central Illinois the next day, thinking, how hypocritical is this? I don't know. And it was, but yeah. And so there are a lot of resilience factors getting some play. Extended family can be, and then we have Wollen and Wollen had resilience factors in killed children in families that had substance use disorders, like insight, independence, relationships, taking initiative, using creativity, humor, and morality. Morality is more important than most people think of from a psychological standpoint. Teachers, a faith community that supports them. I think for the sake of time, since it's really, 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 really late, I won't try to go into the diagnoses, but let's I'm going to share my screen for just like 5 minutes, and I'm going to, because that's what we've got, and I'm going to go to this one, which is, what can we all do to make our services safer and more effective? So you've seen the bird, and I'm going to stop sharing for a second, and I'm going to ask you to unmute yourselves. And for the last few minutes, we need some hope, right? Because we've been looking at a lot of kind of sad and depressing things. So I really like you to reach down inside of yourself and find some one thing that we as a field, or you as an individual, or me as an individual, or anybody can do to make services safer and more effective to people whose family experiences have been wounding in some way due to the presence of mental health or behavioral health, substance use conditions. What's one thing?
I think a
Less
lot of
talk,
it
more
should be-
listening.
More listening. What was the second somebody was saying?
I think you need to build the relationships with people.
Yes, build the relationships. That's hard. That's scary, right?
It's scary, but it in the long run, that's the way you're going to treat anything, is they've got to trust you.
Yeah. And weren't there challenges sort of forged in relationships to begin with?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Showing that you're non-judgmental as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Definitely non-judgmental.
I'm going to throw in one that I think that no matter how you're interacting with people that have had this experience, we have to show respect and share our stories so that it becomes safe and we don't feel so alone.
Yeah. Show respect and share our stories. It isn't us and them.
What?
I said it because it isn't us and them, and you can
Exactly.
be an embodiment of that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I also think that the Ross councils, if you can get involved in those and start to change the image out in your community, you're going to make a huge impact on how people feel safe and even seeking support for the issues that they've got into adulthood.
Excellent. Excellent. Yeah, the Ross councils are very powerful.
Mhm.
What are some other ideas? We've still got 3 minutes. Okay, if you don't want to say, or if it'll take a little while to let it all sink in and think about what we could do as a field, what can we do as individuals? Is there one thing that you might be willing to do, say in this next 6 months? That would help you make some movement on this?
I think that you've, especially for families of children, you know, that are going through this, I have a friend, and one of the sons has really got into, you know, drugs and everything. And they kind of took it on themselves that, you know, they were somehow to blame. And it's like, no, it's a choice. You know, don't take on the responsibility of somebody else's actions. You can help, but there's nothing you can do other than be there for somebody, you know.
And to whatever extent it isn't pure choice, to whatever extent.
Yeah, no, that I don't mean that. I don't mean it's a choice. I understand that. I always say, you know, my father was an alcoholic, and I always say I could have and I drink beer and I drink wine. But you know, I tell people I could have that next glass of wine and I could be an alcoholic. It's not a choice because it may be, you know, inherited. It's, you know, I'm not saying that they choose to do it, but there is a choice at the end of the day that we all have. And I'm not saying it's easy by any means. It's like anything that you could be addicted to, that there's a problem. There is a choice at the end that we have to do something about it.
There's a choice to get help too, yes.
Yeah, I'm not saying that they chose to be an alcoholic. My dad didn't choose to be an alcoholic. You know, it was just something that happened.
Yeah.
You know.
And once we know help is out there, then it's our responsibility to get it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I'm not saying it's easy by any means, because he died at 49 of alcoholism, you know, so. But he didn't choose it.
Yeah.
But he didn't do anything about it either, you know.
Yeah.
So, but I try to tell them, don't blame yourself.
Yeah.
And it could be me, it could be anybody.
Yes.
You know, but if I take that next glass of wine and I become an alcoholic, I know what that can do.
Yeah.
You know, but I'm still choosing to do it.
May the genetic gods be with you.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's what I say, pray. I want it all. Yeah.
Yeah.
I just think in general, education, just continuing to educate ourselves
Yeah.
is huge. You know, doing things like these webinars and outreach programs, and I'm constantly learning every day. So, and I learn from my clients, so that helps too.
I think I learn more from my clients than I do from anything. So,
Yeah, absolutely. And when it comes to learning on subjects of relevance to children of addicted families, learning about trauma is probably the best thing.
Yeah.
Learning about trauma, learning about attachment.
As
Learning
much
about
as I hate to say it, we are out of time.
All right.
And any last comments real quick? Well, I want you to know Pam's going to do one addressing stigma that ties in with some of the same things we were talking about today in June. And when I send out certificates and stuff, I'll send out the flyer so that you can link into that if you want to. I really appreciate the time and the energy you've put into this. This is a new, it's kind of new for the Resource Center to have someone else come in and do some of the work, which I love, and I love Pam's work. I encourage you to take the survey when you're done, and please get a hold of me if there's anything that you need, that I can do. Just keep doing what you're doing and take care of yourself too. Pam, any last comments? It's up to you.
Well, you will hear music coming up over my shoulder. You'd think that that's the official close of the thing, but it's actually that our radio goes on by itself every day at 11:30. But this time it is very appropriate to be going out with music. And I have really appreciated and enjoyed being with you. It started sort of dramatically with an injury in the kitchen, but we are here, and you have wonderful ideas, and I am thrilled that you chose this subject, and that you are doing the work you are doing. Really, really appreciate you.
Thank
And I
you very much. We'll
Thank
see you
you.
soon, I hope.
All right.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.